Companions are arguably one of the most important aspects of any video game, especially one that is story-driven. Companions trudge along the journey with you, witnessing everything as you do, while reacting to such events in their own ways. Video game companions have long been a staple of compelling writing in games, and there have been numerous games in which great companions, for all manners of reason, have accentuated the entire experience to greatness. Many of these companions a lot of you would know, such as Ellie in The Last of Us, Elizabeth in Bioshock Infinite, and the wide cast of companions that trek along with you in your journey in the Mass Effect trilogy and even Red Dead Redemption 2. But what is it that makes a great companion? How can a game write these companions to be as compelling, relatable, and interesting as possible? In many ways, I think that Baldur's Gate 3 answers that question, and as to how, I'll delve into that in the rest of the video. Of course, I think it should be said now that how I or you may perceive good writing or compelling characters comes from a largely subjective viewpoint, and so what I raise throughout this video is simply my own opinion. One of the most critical elements I look for in characters in games, and in particular in companions, is whether these characters truly feel alive. This can easily be said for many video game protagonists such as Arthur Morgan, where not only does the character feel alive through his relatability or his hardships, but the manner in which it truly feels like the world would operate without him, and that it exists outside of his own actions or influence. In Baldur's Gate 3, the companions capture this feeling in great capacity, due to the way in which they interact with the protagonist and with each other, and how each and every one of these compelling characters has motives, goals, and attributes that are separate from the main path of the game. Honing in on one of the most compelling companions in the game, if not the most compelling, Shadowheart. Shadowheart's ambiguity in her mannerisms and her identity lend to her becoming an intriguing character that grows throughout the narrative, but it's clearly established for her much earlier than any other character in the game that she has her own goal and motives for going on this grand adventure, and that she has already been on this trajectory before the game's events. Shadowheart's connection to her goddess Shah and her innate lack of memories lend her to being a character that discovers who she is alongside the player. Sure, the actions of yourself are what may lead to her finding who she is throughout the story's progression, but her quest to retrieve the relic as it originally was already in place before you came along. Shadowheart feels alive because of the fact that she distinctly has her own motives and goals, and although they may align with that of the player for the most part, she doesn't require you to find it out. In this, I mean that if she were not a part of the party, she would still strive for the exact same thing as she does when she is with you on your journey, and that makes her not only feel like a real and separate entity in this world, but it makes the grand world of Baldur's Gate 3 feel like a place that is alive and living without you. It's this feeling that is resonant in every companion in Baldur's Gate 3, from Shadowheart to Astarion to Gale. All of these characters have their own hardships, motives, goals, and challenges, yet they work to face them throughout the journey due to the innate development that they get as they travel with you. They don't feel like empty shells that are simply hired men that are supposed to string you along your journey to defeat the absolute, but rather they strive for something separate to you, something deeply personal and in many instances extremely difficult. Larian Studios clearly knows how to write companions, and the interactions you see with the characters amongst themselves, either when you're simply roaming about or in cutscenes, further lends to this alive feeling I've been focusing on for the last few minutes. And yes, it may feel like a simple thing, how the companions comment on each other's own progression in their personal quest or their interaction with the player, or a wide myriad of things, but this discussion or the banter that they have with one another makes them all feel interconnected to one another outside of your own influence. But what ultimately helps to accentuate the feeling these companions give off is consistent and well done character development that builds their identities and sees them facing off against their hardships in either conquest or failure. Consistent character development is of course the only way to truly write a great and compelling character. All books, movies, TV shows do this in absolute abundance, with the characters starting off at one point and ending up completely different to what they were originally, either for better or for worse. But what shapes this development is the consistent outflow of events that may be larger than life or simply personal, that lead them to changing their worldviews and provides them with insight that is deeply resonant with their character. All the companions in Baldur's Gate 3 excellently replicate this component of great writing, as the long 80+ hour journey of the game creates character arcs that string along throughout the 3 acts of the game. The characters completely change from act to act due to either the events of the main story, their own personal quest, or in most cases a mix of both of these factors. The people they are at the end of the game are in many ways highly contrastive or remarkable to who they were at the start of the game. I think for this, the companion Lae'zel is most reflective of this idea. Lae'zel's own story brings to question many interesting dilemmas, with some of these being established as early as Act 1, such as whether violence is in one's blood or it is nurtured into an individual through their upbringing and outside influences. Many of these dilemmas are the root of Lae'zel's character development, and the way she initially reacts to them changes as the game progresses, and as her perspectives on her people and herself continuously shift. Lae'zel starts off as a violent fanatic, obsessed with the pleasing of her queen Vlaakith, not wielding any sense of empathy or emotion, other than the lust of blood on her hands. Especially in Act 1, Lae'zel's only desire is to cure herself and to claim much blood on her way to the cure. But as the story progresses and as you interact with her and persuade her away from the afflictions and brainwashing she is so entranced in, you see a stark and gradual development in her character that sees her realize the veil held by the Githyanki queen and the lies that her people have been fed. She not only comes to these realizations throughout your journey with her, but she also begins to learn the importance of companionship and the nuances of emotions that she had stored away for so long. Lae'zel's indoctrination from a young age sees her in a trance that we can obviously see, but she cannot see the writing on the wall, and even when faced by attacks by Vlaakith, she still draws anger when her queen is questioned. But as more and more of the truth begins to be revealed, Lae'zel's character begins to develop in a natural and compelling way, and the person she ends up being in Act 3, fighting alongside you, not only for herself and her people, but for the friends and companions she gathered along this journey, is a highly satisfying example of the tremendous and consistent character development present in this game. And that is simply one of the numerous companions that we encounter in Baldur's Gate 3. Most of the points I raised about Lae'zel's extremely compelling character development rings true of most of the companions in your camp, with characters like Astarion and Gale especially holding tightly to this notion. It's uncommon for a consistent character development at such a grand scale to be executed in such a great way in a game like this, as many games simply develop the bulk of a companion or character in a segment dedicated to that character, and once their quest finishes, it's simply the end of the development in turn. But Baldur's Gate 3 averts this problem in a remarkable way, as the game's long runtime sees every companion in the game, in particular the main 4, develop consistently throughout the story, not only through the progression of the main plot, but through the progression of their own personal goals and quests. Baldur's Gate 3 does character development in a way that most other games don't, and you truly feel connected to each and every one of these companions by the end of the journey, due to the fact that you consistently saw their growth as a person and as a person part of the team, from the moment you recruited them in Act 1, all the way to the moment you strike down the Elder Brain once and for all. Although I think Baldur's Gate 3 obviously does companions in a great way, like any other great story with well-written characters, there are still a number of problems with how the companions are written in the game, much of which is better done by other games. One of the points that I raised in this video was the fact that the characters feel alive, with some part of this being contributed to the fact that the companions interact with one another separate from you and your interactions. This definitely does ring true, either in cutscenes or especially when you're simply roaming the world. They may comment on another character's personal quest and how it's been progressing, each other's histories, and even how they fight in combat. This is all great, and it definitely is a great reason as to why the companions in Baldur's Gate 3 feel so alive. However, I don't think there is enough of this throughout the game. In Act 1 and 2, this is definitely a common occurrence, but as you progress to the latter part of the game, especially in Act 3, these interactions slowly dwindle in how common they are, and these interactions become minute and rare. This is quite unfortunate, and although although it may still happen, there simply aren't enough of them in Act 3, especially considering this is where a large part of the main story progression takes place. Taking the example of other companions in games, Red Dead Redemption 2 perfects this. All the camp members are continuously talking to one another all the way from chapter 1 to chapter 6 of the game, and they can be overheard as you stumble into the camp and do your own thing. It truly feels like these interactions are occurring without your presence, and it further adds fuel to the idea that this world exists without your influence and character. It may seem like a small thing to focus on, but it's the small details that often add up to creating that feeling of characters feeling alive and relatable, and it's simply the lessening occurrence of these interactions as the game progresses that creates a problem with the companions in Baldur's Gate 3. The lack of camp interactions between the companions also definitely adds fuel to this fire, and is something Larian can definitely work on to remedy in their future projects. I think it's also important to mention another problem I had with the companions in this game, and that is that some of them are so well developed and have long, drawn out quests, such as Starion, Gale, Shadowheart, Karlach, and so on, but others, such as Halsin, simply have their entire character arcs happen in the span of an act, without any major further development, which detracts from an otherwise great line of well-written and compelling companions. So other than the small gripes I have just mentioned, I of course think that the companions in Baldur's Gate 3 are for the most part extremely well written and are compelling continuously throughout the game's 3 acts. There are many lessons in regards to the game's companions that other studios and writers could take and learn from, especially in regard to how the characters truly feel alive and how they are able to consistently, in an interesting way, develop for a journey that is usually over 80 hours. Of course, there is much Larian could also take in order to further improve the way in which they write their companions in future games, especially in relation to how often the companions should interact with one another outside of select instances. Anyway, I really hope you all did enjoy today's video. If you did, consider dropping a like and subbing to the channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 and RPG content, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.